Okay, so this is a bonus video on how to make the curves, like this one and this one. They're not difficult, they just take a little more finesse. Now this is a freehand curve where I just drew the lines randomly. This one is an arc where I used a circle maker like this to cut out the shapes. So you can use either way you like. We're going to use the circle maker, it'll make it easy. And you can make your arcs any size you like. I'm putting the point in the corner of my paper. And I'm just going to cut my arc. All right, that's going to be my exterior piece. Now I want to cut this side a little smaller. Let's see. I'll make it 3.5. Okay, so this is what I'm going to use as my foundation. And again, I'm going to draw my lines just anywhere. And then make your points anywhere you want. Just kind of eyeball where the center is, or you can put a curve in there. It doesn't matter. And you're going to draw your lines out to the corners just like we did before. Well, and just as I did before, I'm going to fold all of my lines in both directions. And the reason I'm folding them this way first is because then I know where to fold it when I come back. If I just tried to fold it this way, it would be a little difficult. It could be done. You could do it that way, but I find this easier. Okay, got all my folds in there. Now it's time to go to the sewing machine. So I've got my paper here, and I need to select a fabric for number 1. I'm going to use this nice blue. I'm going to take my glue stick. I'm going to glue piece number 1, and then I'm going to set my fabric down on here so that I have a 1/4 inch showing on all sides, including beyond my paper. All right, when I've got that, I'm going to trim away my 1/4 inch seam allowance. And I'm going to give myself a little extra room out here as well. Okay. So there's piece number 1. I'm not going to worry about trimming these edges just yet. So now it's time to put on my muslin. And I've got some muslin here, so I'm just going to line it up. Make sure you overlap the edge of the paper by at least a 1/4 inch. All right, and it's time to sew the line. Okay, I'm going to start a 1/4 inch away with a 1.5 millimeter seam length, stitch length. I'm going to sew right exactly on that line, all the way out into the seam allowance. I'm going to cut my thread, pull out my pins, and go to the pressing station. All right. Press it and trim it just like we did before. Now, when it comes to cutting this, I'm going to cut it away from the paper. I'm not going to cut it exactly on the paper as we did before. So I'm leaving myself a margin. When you're cutting the center part, standard 1/4 inch seam allowance. Okay, just like so. And there's my first background piece. Now I'm going to go back and I'm going to sew the next one. Put this on here, making sure that it overlaps past my paper. All right. Giving that a nice little press. Pulling it away from the paper. 1/4 inch seam allowance. Just like so. And then when I get to the paper part, I'm cutting so that I'm giving myself extra room outside of the stitching area. It doesn't have to be a perfect 1/4 inch. We're going to trim it down a little bit when we get to sewing on the rest of the background, but for right now that's good. And now I'm going to sew on my next triangle, and I'm going to keep doing this all the way up until I get all of my pieces put together. Okay, so I've got my next fabric pinned on. This is going to be triangle for piece number 4. And I'm going to take that to my sewing machine and then just sew directly on the line. Make sure when you're sewing this that you're sewing over here outside past the margin that you left when you cut your previous fabrics. All right, back here again. Now here on this piece, I don't quite have a 1/4 inch all the way around. Well, that's okay. I can piece another section onto that. I'm going to make sure that I'm outside in my margin, and I'm just going to go to the machine and just put a very small little stitch right in there. Now, if you didn't want to piece this together, you could take off the fabric that you sewed previously and use a larger piece, but it doesn't bother me to have a seam in there. But I need to fold it on this line, not the stitching line I just made. So I need to remove the fabric from the stitching line. So that I can fold it along my fold line. And now I can cut my 1/4 inch seam allowance. Here we go. Now, if there's a little gap there, I can put a piece of tape and we'll be in good shape. Just like so. All right. The other side. Okay, and there's that triangle. Now I need my 2 muslin pieces. All right. And I'm cutting this outside edge again. I'm leaving myself a little bit of a margin. And because that's flopping around a little bit, I'm going to pin it in place while I trim it. Just like so. Like I said, it doesn't have to be a perfect 1/4 inch. You're just going to eyeball it and cut off and give yourself an extra little bit of margin. All right, and it's important that you do that on this one. We didn't do that on the straight piecing, but on the curved piecing you need to do that. All right, now this piece, I'm not sure if it will fit, but I'm going to try it. So I'm going to press it. Yeah, whoops, I'm doing this one. Oh, there's plenty. Okay. I'm going to line this up, making sure that I'm outside of the paper by a good little bit. And we're going to sew it. Okay, pressing. I'm doing the exact same thing for every section. Turn it over. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and do that for the remaining 3 triangles, and I'll show you what that looks like when I come back. Okay, I've got all of my pieces sewn together, and I've got a little margin around. I want to make sure that the margin is just shy of a 1/4 inch all the way around. It does need to go beyond the paper, but not by much. So a scant 1/4 inch is all you need. And if it looks like you have areas where it's going a little further out like this, just use your rotary cutter and trim it back a little bit. You don't have to be super precise. You just want a little bit of a seam allowance beyond the edge of your paper. All right. So remember that these were the two paper pieces that we had used when we were cutting out our circle. Okay, that's our block right there, right? Well, to this one, we need to add a 1/4 inch seam allowance. So I have a flexible ruler that I can bend right around that. I'm going to take my muslin and I'm going to make this a little bit larger than it needs to be because I plan on trimming the block in the end anyway. So I'm going to put it near the corner but not necessarily on the corner. This happens to be a 1/4 inch wide, just like so. And I'm going to trim this around. Well, you know what? I'm going to mark it because trimming it is proving to be a little difficult. Yeah, I didn't cut anything, so okay. Again, I'm going to leave it a little bit larger than it needs to be and draw the 1/4 inch seam allowance. I've done enough 1/4 inch seams I can kind of eyeball it, but if you can't, then just get a 1/4 inch mark and go with that. The main thing is to follow the curve. So if it's a little over, a little under, doesn't matter because this piece is going to be oversized anyway. So that's the inset curve. We've added our 1/4 inch seam allowance, and I'm going to cut that out. Okay, so that's going to go in here. Now, this other piece that we have, this was our exterior piece. We need to cut that out. Again, I'm going to make it a little bit larger than it needs to be. But this time I am not adding a seam allowance. I am tracing right on the line. Don't ask me why this works, but it does work. And whether you made a freehand shape or you used a circle maker or a template, it all works exactly the same way. All right. And I'm just going to make this a little bit larger than it needs to be. And I'm going to cut this out. And yes, you could use a rotary cutter, but mine happens to be way over there, so I'm using scissors. All right. So there's my exterior piece. There's my geese. There's my interior piece. Looks kind of odd, but trust me, it'll work. Now, I did mark on here where I was a little bit too big because I don't want to start sewing way out here. My curve won't line up. I want to start sewing from the marks that I made. So let's go to the sewing machine and I'll show you how to do this. I'm going to do the interior curve first. Now, I'm going to take off the 1/4 inch of the clear foot, and I'm putting on the stitch in the ditch foot. The guide is in the center of the foot. I'm leaving the straight stitch, but I'm changing it back to 2.5 millimeters. Oops. All right. Now, the paper piece goes on the top. So I'm going to flip both of my pieces over because I know they go together like this. So I want this edge to line up with this edge. Walk it all the way around. All right, so I'm lining up my edges. Now, here's the tricky part. You have to watch two things. Number one, the edge of the fabric, the background piece, needs to be aligned with the 1/4 inch edge on your foot, like so. I'm going to go ahead and use a starter piece to get me going. All right, so that needs to line up there. The paper, don't pay attention to where the edge of the fabric is. That's just a temporary guide. But the paper has to line up with the blade in the center of the foot. Okay, so we're lining up the paper right there. Okay, so can you see that my fabric is aligned? Let me just put the foot down. My fabric on the bottom is aligned with the outside edge of my foot. The paper is aligned with the inside edge of the blade. I'm going to lift the paper part as I sew, making sure that I keep that fabric underneath aligned with the edge of my foot. And sew slowly. Okay, so lift it up, move the fabric underneath, line up the paper with the blade. I know it looks funny, but trust me, it'll work. You can't see my hands, but I am rotating the fabric underneath. I'm not using pins because pins only hamper my ability to keep things lined up. If you cut a 1/4 inch or more away from the paper, you won't be able to see the two. You can still do this, same technique. You just have to peek more often. Every once in a while, you're going to need to pick things up. All right. my little starter piece. There we go. Now, flip it over and press it out. And it just works. So you don't, and remember, I made my block oversized anyway. I made it 8.5. I'm going to trim it down to 8. So I'm not worried about that little piece. It'll get cut off. Okay, but that looks great. All right, we're going to do the same thing to this big guy here. Again, fabric on the bottom, paper on the top. Now I kind of lay these out the way they should go, so I know where I'm starting. I'm going to flip my paper over, and I'm starting right there. All right, so again, fabric at the edge of my foot. I'm just going to come down a little bit until I'm at that edge where I want it to be over a little bit. Lift my foot up, paper right next to the blade. And so you're moving both at the same time. You're moving the fabric underneath, and you're moving the paper. You're not pulling either one. You're just positioning them. So again, you're watching the fabric at the edge of the foot, and then the paper at the edge of the blade. Now I'm back here, and I'm just going to press this. The seam naturally wants to go towards the curve, so just press it in place. And it works out great. And you can do this with any size circle, any size block. If you get too much of a sharp curve in here, you will have to go back and clip your curve before you press it open, but I'm okay with just pressing it like this. All right, now you can take the paper off. And for the curve blocks, I do like to use my water pen. Okay. All right. Water pen does make the paper, and this is copy paper, so it's a heavy-duty paper. It's more difficult to peel off than like the 12-inch paper or 13-inch paper that came in the club kits a couple months ago. That's actually very nice paper for paper piecing. All right, now I'm taking my ruler and I'm going to trim this block to be 8 inches square. I'm going to start with this line, move over like so. Okay, and what I can see right away is that I'm missing a corner up here. No problem, I'm just going to take this little piece and sew it back on, and then I'll trim that away. Okay, so I've sewn on this little piece to the side. Nobody's ever going to notice it, and we have a beautifully curved pieced block. So you can make curved blocks like these. You can make straight blocks like these. Just have fun with your Wayward geese. You can make them small, you can make them large. This is a fantastic way to use up those little bitty scraps or use scraps out of your crumb bin. I look forward to seeing what you make. Talk to you soon. Bye.